Welcome everyone to tonight's talk at Mountain Cloud. Welcome on this January 30th, 2025. It's been another week of tumult on the national and international scene. Last Saturday, tens of thousands of people marched in the streets across Germany, protesting the rise of the far right in that country. The prevailing message, never again, is now. Monday, just this past Monday, was the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz by Soviet troops. Liberated after SS soldiers had evacuated the camp and forced thousands of prisoners into a death march back to the center of Germany. 80 years ago. And still a small handful of survivors attended the commemoration. Never again. Watch out, they said. And here at home, it was a week of fraught cabinet hearings, all confirmed. Mass deportations, rounding up and transporting migrants on military planes to Guantanamo Bay. And then a deluge of executive orders, shutting down immigration and closing off any legal pathway to asylum in the United States, freezing federal funding across a wide gamut of public programs, rescinding grants and loans, many already distributed, offering 2 million federal employees a buyout to resign, a package most believe would never be paid. To name just a few. Pundits watch this disregard for humanity and engineered chaos and warn, never again is now. At the same time, around the globe, this is a period of celebration. Yesterday was the Chinese New Year, the Lunar New Year. So those festivities will continue for 15 days, culminating in what's called the Lantern Festival, a festival that aims to promote reconciliation, peace, and forgiveness. So the Lunar New Year is marked by ceremonial dancing, burning incense, gathering and feasting, shedding the old and meeting the new. A new beginning. Like those flowers on the altar, just So this year now, just begun, is the year of the snake. An auspicious year. In the West, we tend to see the snake as ominous, even treacherous, a snake in the grass. But in Asian cultures, the snake is a symbol of wisdom and transformation, shedding the skin, a kind of death and new life, a new beginning. The koans take this turn to a fundamental level. the invitation to die or to fall open, such that the world comes rushing in a completely new way. Hakuin Zenji, a famous 17th, 18th century master, put it, die now, and you never have to die again. I suddenly remember being in session with Ruben years ago, and one morning after the, ceremonial kentan, this inspection of the mat, he stood at his place and just said into the dark, if you want to die, go ahead and get that over with now. Then what? Zen calls this the great death. Not a turning away from the world, but a dissolving or dropping away of the grid, the concepts, the constructs that make us see the world, see our life in a particular limited and fixed way, a way determined by our judgments and fears, or as Zen puts it, our greed, aversion, and delusion. It's as if we willingly live with blinders on, when actually there is no edge. At the center of that fixity is our notion of a separate self, the I. We set up like an axle around which everything revolves. What if it's not so? What if it never was? What might it be to shed that I? To shed the screen, the grid, and see what happens to the ever-revolving wheel. As a pointer for tonight, I'd like to take up a koan. This is case 22 in the Blue Cliff Record, or Hekigan Roku, and it also comes back again in the Book of Equanimity, or Shoyo Roku, and case 24 there. And it's called Seppo's Poisonous Snake, or in another translation, Seppo's Turtle Nose Snake. So here's the case. Seppo, instructing the assembly, said, "There's a poisonous snake on the South Mountain. All of you should look at it carefully." Choke said, "Today in the Zen hall, there is a great one who has lost body and life." A monk told this to Gensha, who said, "Only Elder Brother Ryo could say something like that." That's Choke. "However, I wouldn't talk like that." The monk asked, "What then would you say, Master?" And Gensha replied, "Why does it have to be the South Mountain?" Unman threw his staff down in front of Seppo and acted frightened. So that's the case. And we'll circle back. It's got these different pieces. But before turning to it, just a quick reminder about listening to a Teisho or Zen talk. We are using words to point to something words can't convey. Tradition says trying to comprehend the fundamental reality of who you truly are through words is like trying to scratch an itch through a thick leather boot. It sounds futile. But this tradition is still full of words. So the invitation is to listen with empty hands. No worries if you don't understand. It's possible to hear something. We know this, to hear it over and over, and then out of the blue, a phrase suddenly lands. So maybe just listen as if to a piece of music. And if just one word strikes, let that resound. So to this case, Seppo is here a seasoned master with many monks in his assembly. And these other figures in the case, Choke, Gensha, and Unman, they were all Seppo's disciples and Dharma heirs. Quite a lineage. Here Seppo is addressing his assembly. Some say 1,500 monks. There's a poisonous snake on the South Mountain. That's where they are. The monastery at Mount Seppo, the zendo where they're sitting. And here's the snake. The honored, deadly snake that shows up again and again in the koans. What is it? There's a commentary by a Master Tenkei, who's a contemporary of Hakuen. He writes about this snake, this turtle-nosed snake. This is Tenkei. He says, this is borrowing a name to enable people to discuss this matter. Hyakujo, great master, called it a tiger. Joshu called it going to drink tea. Shiko called it a dog. Rinzai called it the true person of no rank. Baso called it sun-faced Buddha, moon-faced Buddha. Unman called it kanshiketsu. When he's asked, what is the fact? Dried shit stick, kanshiketsu. Tozan called it masakin, 3 pounds of flax. Tenkei goes on, it is called forth at will, sometimes as a staff or a cane, sometimes as a bamboo stick, referring to everyone's own mind in innumerable various ways, is just for the purpose of activating students' potentiality, this absolute capacity. What can activate it? The snake, your own mind, he says. But he's not talking about the brain. That famous statement from Dogen, mind is no other than mountains, rivers, the great wide earth, the sun, the moon, and the stars, the flowers, the Buddha, and the candle. There's a poisonous snake right here in this zendo. All of you should look at it carefully. Seppo's not only calling out, look, he's presenting the snake. Look into it closely. On the one hand, you can't meet it. You are it. And yet, if we truly meet it, we can't survive. Your separate self dies. You die. And the whole world comes to life. This one true self, empty of any border, dynamic, excluding nothing, nothing. Actually, we're meeting it all the time, moment to moment. It took Seppo years of earnest practice to be bitten by the snake, to shed everything and see, to see for himself. Whenever I come to him, I'm struck anew by his own awakening story, the account, which is actually quite encouraging and also illuminating. So I'm just going to share it. There's another character in it, his dear Dharma brother, Ganto. So here's his story. Seppo and Ganto are close Dharma siblings, disciples of Toksan, this great master. Ganto, the younger one of the two, had a really deep awakening experience early on. He's thought of as a kind of Dharma genius. And then there are scenes all along the way in the record and the koans of Ganto trying to help Seppo, help him out. But here, they're traveling together on pilgrimage. And they get caught in a heavy snowstorm, forced to stop and take shelter for several days in a small village on what's called Turtle Mountain. So there they are, and Seppo spends the whole time, day and night, sitting zazen. Ganto lies around, sleeping, taking it easy, total leisure. And at one point, Ganto just turns over and sees Seppo sitting, just endlessly sitting. And he says, "What do you think you're doing sitting like a statue? You're going to frighten the villagers." Seppo points to his heart and says, "I'm not at ease. I'm truly anxious. I don't dare cheat myself by not diligently practicing." So Ganto says, "Okay, tell me what you've experienced and I'll check it for you." Seppo starts out, he says, "Well, when I first went to Ingen Zayan's place, his first great teacher, I heard him expound on emptiness and form, and at that time I found an entrance." Ganto says to him, this is in the record, "For the next 30 years, don't speak about this matter again." And then Seppo says, "Then I saw Tozan's poem, this famous awakening poem of Tozan, and he quotes it. Avoid seeking elsewhere, for that's far from the self. Now I travel alone. Everywhere I meet it, now it's exactly me. Now I'm not it. It's so resonant. Gato says, if that's so, you'll never save yourself. Hanging on those words. And Seppo says, later I asked Toksan, can a student understand the essence of the ancient teachings? And he hit me. He hit me and said, what did you say? At that moment, says Seppo, it was like the bottom falling out of a bucket of water. And Gato says, quoting this old saying, haven't you heard it said that what comes in through the gate isn't the family treasure? Seppo says, then in the future, what should I do? And Gato says, in the future, if you want to expound a great teaching, then it must flow forth from your own breast to cover heaven and earth. He just says that. And somehow in that moment, Seppo, the record says, experienced unsurpassed enlightenment. His turning word. He bows and says to Gato, elder brother, at last today, Tortoise Mountain has attained the way. When you wake up, the whole world awakens. There's no other way. There's a poisonous snake on the South Mountain. All of you should look at it carefully. Right where we sit. Not just biting us. Eating up the whole universe. Like that sneeze. Whole ocean in a single gulp. So then Seppo's disciple Choke says, today in the Zen hall there are many who have lost their body and life. Or another translation, there's a great one who's lost body and life. Completely eaten up right there by those words. Couldn't be closer. Listening, shifting, cold. Dogen calls our practice practice-realization. How many times we circle back, come home to that, this practicing, and at the same time, already bitten. The famous phrase, this verse, the Shinjin Mei verses on trust and mind. There's a line that says, whatever comes up, immediately not to. It sounds like that practice in Dogen's practice realization. Whatever comes up, immediately not to. But actually, it's the fact there is only one. This separation we imagine doesn't hold up. Wherever you turn, there it is. So later on, a monk conveys the scene of Seppo's teaching to Gensho, Huansha. And he says, why does it have to be South Mountain? So free, so at ease, so at large. Gensha knows this all-pervading world, and he presents it. He also points to it. Why only South Mountain? Why only in this zendo? It's exactly where you are. The family treasure. Our native ground. And then finally in this scene, Unman responds. If you've been around the koans for a while, you might notice that he often gets the last word in these exchanges. In this case, it's a young Unman. It's thought to be, so he's like in his 20s. And gets a little criticism for this later on, his gesture. It's so, I don't know, kind of wild. He stands up, throws his staff down in front of Seppo, and acts frightened. Maybe a little excessive, later pundits say. What a freewheeling scene, though. I don't think he's pretending. There's the real snake. That's it. The whole of it. As Yamada Koan puts it, a single staff exhausts the entire universe. That is the entire universe. And Tenkei, again, has a little to say here. He writes, or says, but it's in the writings, suddenly, see it? What has suddenly shown its face is this snake that has been there all along. Look, thrown in front, opening its mouth, it swallows even Seppo. Even as you look, it is so lightning quick that its traces cannot be discerned. And then Tenkei refers to the last line in this verse that Seppo has written to this case. Shouting, Tenkei says, shouting, Seppo says, look right at your feet. See where you are and watch where you're going. So how else might we see this staff, this snake, this fact? I mentioned that it shows up here and there in the koans. And one famous case is the very first transmission between Shakyamuni Buddha and his disciple Mahakashapa. Now we know this scene. It's the Buddha's last public teaching. And the crowd is gathered around waiting. What will he say? And there must have been a flower there. And he just looks down, takes it up, and twirls it. Kashyapa sees it, recognizes it, breaks into a smile. A smile so big it breaks his face, breaks the universe. And then Mumon writes this line in his verse. in handling a flower, the tail of the snake manifested itself. There it is. There's another powerful koan in the Mumonkan, or Gateless Gate, about a great cow behind a latticed window. And the koan says the cow's massive body has passed through that gridded gate. It's often interpreted as all our concepts and ideas, our philosophies and theories, all fallen away. The great cow is completely exhausted, extinguished. You could say she's been bitten by the snake. The koan then asks, why is it that her tail can't pass through? You know, this scene, the whole cow, pass through. But this tiny little tail. Momon writes, it's strange and marvelous. So how to see with our own eyes, to see for ourselves. The irony is, the clearer the looking, the more the seer gets out of the way. Call it a snake, a flower, a tiny little tail. Call it desk, computer, floor, microphone, squares on the screen. By any name, it is so near. So if you're practicing with mu, let mu be immediate. Let mu occupy everything. We hear the invitation, melt into mu without remain. Then what? Or if you're following the breath, rest in that completely. Let the breath flow forth from your own breast to cover heaven and earth. And let the world, the whole world, in. The whole world. Let it realize us. Thank you for this shared practice.